love judo.
I think it's kind of like my phylogeny, I'm sure, is wrong. But if you look at a hyena, it kind of reminds you of a half dog, half cat. It kind of has that thing. And
looks like a dog to me.
In some ways, the hyena is closer in behavior, characteristics, and all that stuff to like a cheetah than a cheetah is to a house cat. Even though the cheetah and the house cat are genetically closer, whatever, like I'm just saying, I mean, this is obviously a very loose metaphor, but culturally, the hyena is closer to a cheetah or a lion.
Yeah.
So like when you go back in the arts, a very classical pre-kids class, let's sell this to America version of karate or judo is going to be closer to a Brazilian pre-Americanized, pre-UFC jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. That's what it made me think.
But I just think we're still doing the same stuff. We're still doing everything they're doing at Machida Karate. We're still doing all that. We just added a bunch of shit to it.
Yeah.
That's what I think. We're just doing more. We're doing that and then some in a different, and a lot of times I feel like as I age or as we age, maybe we're doing more of that stuff than the more newer school stuff.
Yeah, maybe.
So they're kind of judging us without knowing us.
You guys are
just saying.
You guys are definitely doing more of that stuff than the standard strip mall jiu-jitsu place.
And I think a lot of that comes from you know more psychology than me, but I think our human brains are incapable of keeping all the information in at once.
Totally.
So at some point in time, we have to decide what we're going to emphasize and keep and what we're going to throw out.
Yeah.
And that's that kind of thing where sociologically, that's like the crisis of the West now is old culture versus new culture and battling it out. It's like manifested into every aspect.
Like your podcast, what you were just listening to?
Yeah.
He was just listening to a podcast.
Yep.
About
generational gaps.
Generational gaps. So we have a generational gap in jiu-jitsu.
Oh,
we do. Yep.
Well, this is a good segue into the actual topic because, you can't do everything. You got to choose what you're going to do.
Yep.
And you got to choose how you're going to think about what you're doing. So today's topic is going to be rolling. How to figure out the best mindset for when you're rolling.
When you're rolling.
Getting your actual training in. What are you thinking about? How are you thinking about it? Before we do that, though, who's here?
Who? I don't know. Who's
here?
Today, what we have is a ghost participant.
Where?
Right there.
Oh, yeah.
Right in front of that hori board.
Yeah.
That killer hori board reminiscent of a 1982 pig. And I love that board. It's a tri-fin, like an 82. It would have probably been a twin fin. But
it's been in the ocean like once.
Yep. That's an awesome little pig.
Yeah.
We should have taken it in the ocean this summer.
We should have. There's not much of a rocker on it, but that's the style of the board.
That thing's insane.
But it is insane.
Yeah,
I saw a kid riding a skateboard the other day, which was a miniature surfboard with two wheels in line.
Uh-huh.
And it was totally cool how he was like, it's like he was surfing on the street.
Yeah. Have you seen the one where the rear truck is regular and then the front truck has the ability to not only if this is the truck in a plane, normally a truck goes like this. It also pivots like this.
That's killer.
So it allows you to pump turns.
Yeah.
It turns like a skateboard.
That's rad.
I forgot what those are called, but they're really cool. Yeah.
And I think ever
turns like a
since
surfboard. Yeah.
we all saw Back to the Future, we're all dreaming of a hoverboard. I know I am.
Ever since 1985.
Yes, I want a
Tobin wasn't even born or something.
I want a hoverboard so bad. I imagine it where it's kind of integrated with your mind. It has AI, Neuralink, whatever in there. And as you ollie, it's 0 Gs for just a little bit of time and then starts to come back down. Then you ollie to 0 G and then it comes back down. Wouldn't that be sick?
That'd be super sick.
Super sick.
So sick. So who's here?
We got Melissa Haueter.
The CEO.
The black belt, femme fatale, Supermom CEO.
Ooh, I like
All
that.
right, we can go with that.
We got Chris Haueter,
The OG, older grappler.
the original gangsta. OG.
Yeah, older grappler. I like.
The older grappler. All right, all right.
Old.
We got
old grappler.
John behind the lens.
Woohoo!
Yay,
We
John.
got Brandon behind the fire torches. Helping us with our lighting.
lens.
We got
Who is a
special-
grip and lighting expert?
Yeah, an expert in lighting here. Brandon,
DP.
Brandon behind the
awesome.
torches. And we got Tobin, the producer. All right. So we're talking about rolling today. We're going to pontificate on what you should be thinking about when you're rolling, what your attitude should be when you're rolling, and try to figure out what the best way to do it is. Because we talked a lot about street art sport, and there is a lot of implications as far as like what you should be thinking and what you should be focusing on. And I know in my personal experience, there's a whole variety of mindsets and things that go into my actual roles. And it'd be nice to hear from you guys what you're thinking about in your roles, how you're thinking about your roles, and what the best way to do it is.
Well, I'll just kick it off a little bit because first of all, I'm kind of not a like super should person, right? Like the word should kind of like bugs, right? Because I'm very much into individuality, freedom, like it's your experience, right? So whatever you're thinking about, that's what you should be thinking about. Because if you're trying too hard to force change within your mind, like usually it's not super positive. Or if you're like getting down on yourself because you're thinking, I should be thinking about this, but instead I'm thinking about that. You know, I feel like to me, it shouldn't be such a struggle or a fight, right? That's what it shouldn't be. And ultimately, the goal, in my opinion, is complete absence of thought and meditation and being completely present in the moment and just allowing it to happen. And I'm not saying that that's how a white belt might think during rolling versus a blue, purple, brown, whatever. But I'm saying for me, and I think for Chris as well, that our goal is to enter into the void and be in a meditative state where our body is just expressing our art and there's no thought process at all.
Wow.
Yep. And if you,
Whoa, dude.
I mean, if you like really analyze that in the combat-based philosophy of threes, you've got mind, a body, and spirit. And when you're rolling, you're trying to balance and integrate that. And like I would say that competitive rolling is a different mindset and a different body focus and a different spirit than would be like flow rolling. It's like if you want to get fit for a combat sports, you need your cardio, your strength, flexibility. That's the other three, right? You want that balance. You don't want to be super strong but unfit and inflexible. You don't want to be so overly flexible and relaxed in your like cardio effort because you don't have any burst. So it's finding that balance. But again, if you try to balance it too much, you just get mushy gray. It's important to go say, what would be the extreme if I rolled with flexibility only as my only attribute? What would it be if I rolled with cardio, fitness as my only attribute? And what would it be if strength, which like immediately connects you to framing and all that? And then you realize this frame isn't very good unless I add flexibility on it and I reduce the amount of cardio effort I add in it. And so like for me, I think there's basically three mindsets when we roll. There's the competition mindset where you clearly have a goal to win. My goal, my objective is to control and submit my opponent, utilizing everything I got, athletics, attributes, and art. Then you have your flow roll, where your goal is to, like I always say, if you want to learn to flow roll right, it helps to have a partner who's also interested in that. And you're both trying to almost make the other person look good. if like you were watching it from the outside, it shouldn't look like a choreographed roll, but it should look like both players. It would be something you would want to see in an action movie where you're making something that's hard look easy. You're flowing through the techniques. They're escaping the technique and countering, and you're countering the counter and rolling back. And then that flow rolling is where you get the spirit and the mind part that you can reintegrate back into your competition rolling. And then what I have is my old man version of rolling, and I'm not sure how it fits in my threes, but that's like where I'm trying to pretend that I'm like 80 years old and have a flu. And how would I possibly roll? And that gets very sloth-like, very almost to try to remove all attributes and see if I can survive.
Well, you said competition. You said flow rolling.
Competition, flow rolling.
And the
third one is the one
your...
I'm trying to like integrate, which is what I call old man rolling.
Yeah.
But that's kind of a blend.
But maybe we could almost change it to technical rolling.
Technical rolling. That's
instead
a good
of old man, because I think you don't necessarily have to be old to learn to roll technically.
True.
And it could be advantageous for more people to learn how to remove so much strength and speed, and maybe learn how to be more structurally, competent.
Because part of what I'm going to call the old man rolling, it clashes with a flow rolling, because you're framing and trying to stop your opponent's movement. Mm-hmm. Whereas with flow rolling, you're allowing your opponent's movement and trying to flow with it. Whereas the old man roll, you're shutting it down.
Yeah, and that art corner of the triangle can drift in any direction it needs to, like art can.
Yes.
So it makes sense that both of those things fit into that corner of the triangle.
I think so.
One thing that can, so basically you're saying there's a variety of different mindsets that you carry into every role depending on what the role is and what your individual goals are.
Or what my mood is.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just depending on how I feel when I walk out here, what I'm thinking, right?
Yeah.
Because we're humans and we think different things.
Yeah. And so you might have different thoughts for different roles. My concern with that type of thinking is that somehow we lose the martial spirit, samurai spirit aspect of the activity if you just are having fun and flow rolling with your friends all the time. So, even in these like flow roll art rolls, how much is your mind on finishing the person? And getting finished too, because then there's the flip side of being the samurai that's finishing. It's getting finished and processing that. What are your thoughts on that? Like keeping the samurai spirit in the activity, right? Because if you're going to promote everyone just flow rolling around, which I'm not saying that's what you're doing, but if that's, say as a idea, we just say everyone just flow roll your life away, then there's no laying the hammer down. And I think that's a really important part of maintaining the whole thing.
Right. And flow rolling isn't void of submissions, right? Flow rolling has lots of submissions and lots of escapes and lots of exchanging of movements. And that's a teaching tool. It's a way to learn how to perform so that you can be more competitive and more relaxed while you're doing it.
Yeah.
So what you're also saying too, I think it keeps bringing my head back to think street, because that's a big part of it too. We're thinking street, but it's not necessarily I'm pretending like this person's attacking me. No, by thinking street, and I think we've been over this before, we're always aware of where the strikes could be. We're always aware of where the other person's hands and head are, things that they could injure us with. So I think that that's a piece of it. And it's not like necessarily a conscious thinking of it, but it's more just an awareness, right? So that's happening. And then the other part of the question, I forget what I was going to say.
Nice. I love that.
It's almost like Aikido has a think street mindset.
Yeah.
flow art practice, but absolutely misses reality.
Right.
Because it really lacks that sport wing of the triangle.
Yeah.
Which, in my opinion, you absolutely critically have to have if you're going to have good street and realistic art.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it becomes Aikido or the Tai Chi,
Yes.
which I'm not saying those are bad. I think they're actually helpful to the competitive athlete or the guy who's interested in life and death self-defense.
Yeah, so the cooperative flow is something that everyone should learn how to do, in my opinion.
Yes.
However, most of our time is spent actually rolling in a more competitive style,
Uncooperative.
uncooperatively. And how often I'm looking for a submission is how often one is presenting itself. So I'm not trying to necessarily, like, I'm trying to do things to make you give me the opportunity to submit you. That is the goal. In my opinion, I am trying, pretty much most of the time when I roll, I'm trying to find a submission, because that's the way that my brain is wired for jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
Is that a submission means I win, I want to win, therefore I'm trying to submit. If I'm rolling with like a small child, or I already submitted the person several times, maybe I'll back off and work on other aspects. But, I'm going to try to at least get one.
Yeah, it's and in
one,
that
that's a good
like
one rule.
subgroup, you branch out into the binary of control and submit. These are like the two things that you're simultaneously doing. Because if you're only after subs all the time, those kind of grapplers tend to have less control.
Yes, and what Chris would say too, here's another one. Control, control, control until a submission squeezes itself out.
Yes.
Rather than just like submit, submit, submit. I'm really looking at how I can structurally control the other person.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the submission just happens if
Yes.
it's going to.
It's a result of excellent control, all the way to the point where the joint doesn't go anymore. You got it.
And it's also
Rather than
more safe.
jump to the arm lock.
Yes, it's also more safe and better for
Yes.
aging and jiu-jitsu.
Definitely.
So given all that, how important is it to get a sub in your rounds that you do?
I'm just happy I can show up and roll.
Yeah.
But it used to be very important when I was younger, because
So-
if I'm training with, like, I'm going to compete next week. I remember my very last competition, and we were rolling in Big Bear, and I submitted a guy with the same move that I won the competition with. And I was very confident in that it was a guard arm lock, like a perfect guard arm lock. So I was really trying to set those up, because I want to get those in every roll, because that's how I want to win my matches, right?
And there's pressure of time.
Yes, you only have 5 minutes to get this submission. But anymore, I'm just happy I can still roll. So I don't care.
Yeah, it's like sometimes
Happier when I get a submission, I guess.
you'll often hear the non-competitive grappler who thinks they're doing really good art, street oriented, that, but fights don't have time limits. They don't have man-made imposed limits, but there's always time limits.
Got to get in and out of
Within
there.
everything.
Yeah.
There might even be a shorter amount of time in a street altercation than there is in a sport match, which allows you a distinct 5 to 10 minutes amount of time. In a street thing, you might have 30 seconds until that dude's friend runs up holding a bat. So there's a time factor that's just uncontrollable in the street, because the problem with street is it's so uncontrollable. And when you're trying to get really into street and self-defense, because part of our brains deny that it's out of our control. So we impose a false sense of power and control that isn't really there. And then when the altercation happens, you're left almost in a frozen panic state, because you practiced all these ways to control it, and now it's not going the way I practiced. I practiced it 1,000 ways, but it's going on the 1,001st way, and I can't get, because that's why you go back to art and sport, because that gives you that realistic, in the moment change, because it's constant change. Nothing remains the same. It's constant change.
Yeah, it's interesting. it kind of sounds like no matter what you're doing, you got to bounce around the three corners of the street art sport triangle, and
I
you got to
think so.
force yourself into that sport triangle, even if it's just in your roles with your pals at the gym. And I think it sounds like what you need to do is you need to identify training partners for different things.
Yes.
So you got to have people that you can flow with and experiment with. You got to have people you can think more street oriented with, and maybe you have someone that's even like you punch and stuff like that, and people, I punch people now when I know that it's okay for them. And then your sport people, like Chime, for example, for me, is somebody that I can go to roll with, and I can say, hey, you want to roll for real?
Yeah.
And then he goes, yeah, every time, because he's
and
down.
that will feel like an IBJJF match.
And the best is when you have a training partner who you can do any type with. When you find somebody who's like your person that you could just, sometimes you're rolling really hard, sometimes you're flowing, and you guys can kind of feed off of each other. You just know which one you're going to do.
Yeah.
And then to me, those are always like the best.
And each group kind of has its own feel, usually set by the leadership, a culture like the other binary is. There's like groups that the burden to tap is on you. If you don't tap fast enough, they're going to hurt you. Mm-hmm. And that is closer to real competition and closer to street. But it's more injurious to the group and creates intergroup competitiveness and rivalry that can be bad. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you shift that and say the burden of injury always lies upon whoever injures them, like I have no right to hyperextend your elbow, even if you're too stupid not to tap. But that can also set up a false sense of safety where people ride locks to the very last minute.
Yeah.
So when I'm training in an unfamiliar group, my tapping hand is always ready a lot quicker than it is when I'm in the garage or with like guys that I'm used to rolling with who I know won't fuck me up if I tap late.
My tapping hand was always really ready whenever I competed. Because I knew, and I would do it myself, that we were going to try to break it.
You can hear people yelling, break the arm, break the arm.
Oh, man, I saw this situation unfold so horribly one time. There's two guys on the mat. One's higher rank, one's lower rank. The lower rank guy was visiting from Brazil, and they both had a strong ego. And I'm rolling with the lower rank guy, and he goes, let's take it easy, because on the next round I got the other guy, and I'm gonna get a piece.
Ooh,
and
so
the other guy with the ego also didn't want to tap. The lower rank guy got his arm, tore his bicep off of his arm, right? Oof. So then his arm just went completely limp because he didn't want to tap. Yeah. The other guy was ready to go until he tapped and tore the bicep off, and his arm just was like completely, it was like so gruesome and nasty. But that's, right? That's the worst case scenario.
Referee, I would allow most upper belt adults, especially a black belt, the burden to tap is on that guy. But when I would ref kids, like I distinctly remember once, a kid's arm was fully extended, and I ran it and went, stop. I tapped them both. And the kid whose arms from parents were mad at me. Yeah. And came up after him, tried to explain how their kid could bend their arm all the way. And it's like, I just said, I don't care. I am not going to be the guy who lets your kid's arm get broken. Yeah. That's kind of like where I think as a culture, jiu-jitsu, there was a period of time where it was kind of getting like all the things learned by the sports of wrestling and the sports of judo and all that, those lessons were not learned yet with kids grappling thing. And it seemed like kids were getting hurt. You'd see kids nursing their sore elbows, and I just don't think that's good.
Yeah, I don't think it's good at all.
I actually think that they've integrated that into the rules now. I think that the ref stops the match once the submission position has been achieved.
That's good.
Without it going all the way, which actually, if you think about it, that's really good defensively for the defender as a kid to learn that, like,
the ref will stop it quick, so don't get there.
so don't even get there.
Yeah.
Because that's really, that ends up being what you're doing anyway.
Right.
Well, it's like when
avoiding
Chris was
position.
teaching us a lot of things, you know, can we learn arm lock escapes? We didn't get to learn arm lock escapes.
'Cause you're just
It was
not
like,
gonna
you
get there.
tap. You
Oh,
tap when you get in an arm lock.
Yeah.
You don't get put in the arm lock.
Learn-
This is your punishment for getting in that position.
Learn how to not get in a
Because
position.
you're going to escape. He would say stuff like, you're going to escape 3 out of 10 times. Do you want to escape 3 out of 10 times, or do you not want to get there in the first place?
Yeah.
Even if it's 9 out of 10, on that 10th, your fucking arm is injured.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's important to find a way to communicate with your training partners and find those competition rounds, though,
Yep.
because you fight how you train, right? And if the
Yes.
idea is that this is a martial combat event that we're all partaking in, you don't want to fight like a flow roller.
Yes.
And you got to push yourself into that competition corner. It sounds like, but in doing that, what?
Well, let me add one more point. So in boxing and Muay Thai, which I was simultaneously doing, I remember when I finally learned how to actually spar. And like in the striking arts, I call that the like purple belt, the phase, where you know how to fight realistically without trying to injure your opponent, but you're trying to work your skills, which means you got to eat some punches. And then you really do grasp how, all the combat sports and arts really are exchanges. And there's no such thing only in the movies where you get to do all the punching and you block and dodge everything. I mean, that does happen if you're Floyd Mayweather against a total low-ranked guy. You're going to not get hit at all and do all of the hitting. And it creates this illusion in our head that that's what I should always be doing, where the reality is you have to learn how to spar without causing brain damage, which is really hard because you have to get hit a bunch of times before you learn. And you have to be sparring with people that know how to, what they say, pull a punch. But you're not necessarily pulling the punch the way the novice brain hears, he pulled the punch. You're not putting the sting behind that shot. Like
It's not like you're trying to go for a knockout, because if
Right.
you were knocking each other out every time, your brains would be completely
brains
mush,
are
and you have to
scrambled.
save that for the
Yes.
actual event.
Yes.
So it's the same thing in jiu-jitsu. It's like an analogy, right? As we don't want to F each other up, right?
We don't want to constantly wrenching on each other's
to be
joints.
able to
Yeah.
come back and train again the next day. And for me, like when I was learning jiu-jitsu, you used to go until you felt it. Oh, can you feel it yet? Can you feel it yet? I'll teach new white belts. I don't ever want you to feel the arm lock, because I'm paying for now all that can you feel it yet through having sore elbows and problems if something goes in the wrong way and whatever, where like I'll just wake up in the middle of the night, my elbow's stuck, and you know, we don't want to feel that. It's not something we should feel. I think we should be tapping when it's going into it rather than waiting to feel the
Until it's-
hyperextension, even in drilling.
Yeah.
Or a jaw choke, right? I mean,
Chris's favorite, jaw chokes.
when the guy's buried his neck and you have your RNC linked around on his jaw, I mean, technically you could say it's a jaw lock. I am putting a joint lock on your temporomandibular joint, and if you don't tap, your jaw breaks. I mean, so in one sense, that's okay, but because it's causing surface damage, lip damage, teeth damage, we're trying to eliminate that type of surface damage from jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of jaw chokes.
We're not wrenching, we're not skin grinding people to get our arm in there, and like that's what I call rough jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
Not a fan.
And it's unnecessary because in the street, no one's going to tap because they're having a skin burn. Right? You'll let them burn your skin and tear hair off, even cause a bruise. That's not going to win the fight against the hypothetical opponent that feels zero pain. And if they feel zero pain, the only thing that works is joint lock and choke. And but concussion damage, which is what like the knockout shot or a body blow is. So rather than surface attrition wounds, which sometimes in street schools, they'll do those little things like a little finger lock. You bend down or some little tiny little lock. And yeah, it works right here because I don't want my finger broken. I'm going to do an Aikido roll out of that.
Yeah.
But in the real world, it's going to go, now I'm going to have my other 3. So when I get you, I'm going to really lay in a lock. So even for street, that kind of surface shit becomes unrealistic.
I got in a fight in high school, and the guy that I was fighting was like taking Sambo, and I like had no clue. So he put me in a straight ankle and was trying to break my ankle. And I didn't know what to do, so I started grabbing his toes. I was like trying to break one of his toes. They're kind of hard to break. I was like trying really hard to break his toe.
Harder to break than you'd think.
You guys were like
do it.
laying in a Scissor Sisters in a street fight?
I mean, basically, it was like at a party. So there was like a group of people around us, right? Like, kind of like, basically the group of Sambo guys were like coaching him. They're like, a little more to the left to snap that foot right off. And I was like, what is going on? I had like no idea.
Yeah.
And so I was trying to break his toe to get out. I don't actually remember how it like ended, but yeah, I mean, he took me down and put me in.
Did
like,
you
50-50.
walk away
Yeah,
or
50-50.
limp away?
I limped away. Yeah, it kind of snapped my ankle a little
Yeah.
bit. But he took me down and put me in 50-50 in a straight ankle, Sambo style, I guess. And I was trying to break
And that's
his toes.
kind of like too, like so in the original purity of the jiu-jitsu art. Like I remember when I was like a purple and brown belt, and there would be like a black belt match happening, which were rare because jiu-jitsu was like the first pans were, I think 98 or whenever it was. And I remember Jean-Jacques winning fights by foot locking guys, and half the crowd would say boo, like that was considered not
Cheap.
It wasn't jujitsu
Yeah.
yet.
the jiu-jitsu yet, right? And I remember he lost one fight where the guy scored something on points where Jean-Jacques was literally chasing the guy who was limping, running away because he escaped out of lock. He yanked his, like he fucked his knee up bad.
His busted leg.
And part of the theory behind the purity of the art is because that's what would happen in a real fight in Valley Batuto, where you can shake off a broken ankle, but you can't shake off a choke when you're passed out.
Yeah.
Which my choke is the king of subs.
But if they get one arm,
But
you still have the other arm.
Right, but then it goes like, but the argument of arm, once one arm is really broken, the other one becomes really easy
Was
to
it
get.
a Monty Python?
Yes.
It chops off the arm.
Monty
He's
Python.
like, come back here.
Yes, yeah.
His like, blood's like squirting out of his like. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah.
So it's like one could say that almost the lowest form of lock is the foot lock.
What about the wrist lock?
The wrist locks are interesting because they seem to be a lower form of lock, but they're almost as debilitating as an elbow joint lock, right?
Yeah.
Because once one hand is gone, because it's hands, head, and hips.
Right.
And when you're eliminating that guy's hands, that's pretty bad, right? So a good way to train that, which I used to do occasionally, is you either wear a sock on your hand or you just close your hands the whole time and
that's what I
play
do.
no grips. You can do only underhooks, only arm grips, but no finger grips. And that's a really good way to see how grip reliant you are and go, God, I'm so grip reliant. What if I did it more hips and body? How would I grapple if I had no hands? If my wrists were broken in the fight and I'm going to go on.
This is a little bit of a tangent, but like, who are these anti-footlockers back in the day? Because I watch a lot of like historical jiu-jitsu footage just because it's like
And you
something
see
I'm
it?
curious about. And I see like Hickson going for
Yeah.
heel hooks, going
Yeah.
for straight ankles. I see these old school guys in old school videos, in old school practices doing that stuff.
Me
And
too.
the Kosen guys doing the old judo stuff with footlocks and everything. So like,
I'm not
who are the people that
really
were
sure
anti-footlock?
of the origin of it. I mean, part of it is when you're trying to teach white belt and kids, I think introducing them too early isn't good for their overall
Development.
development.
Yeah.
But I've heard counter arguments that are sound of why you should and could teach white belts footlocks.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like my basic theory is you should be introduced to them sometime. Like the ideal, you're introduced at blue belt to the straight footlock, not twisting things or heel hooks yet. At purple belt, you're introduced, but instead of learning escapes, you learn when you're there, tap.
Yeah.
And sometime at senior purple brown belt, you introduce that you go ahead and be the guy who institutes the foot thing. But that purple and blue belts should not do footlocks, but they should learn how to counter them and escape them because they're obviously prevalent. And I think, I mean, that argument, I'm sure for IBJJF rules, which is and what most people generally follow, people don't get to do twisting knee and leg
Twisting knee
bars
stuff
until
until
black belt.
Brown and black.
Brown
and I know,
and black.
But blue and purple can do straight ankles.
Yes.
So that's exactly what you're saying, the way
And-
they have it set up.
And I think it was
that's
just
wise.
at the time earlier on, it was kind of like a divide. Like some schools
Yep.
did do footlocks and some schools didn't do footlocks.
Yes.
And you know,
But my question is, who are the non-footlockers? Because I don't see any anyway. I mean,
a piece of
somebody
of
was not liking it. I just
There
trying
was
to
a
figure out who it was.
percentage of jiu-jitsu practitioners weren't as into it.
Yes.
And then there was a percentage that were more into it.
I just feel like
I
people.
think it was kind of like the older, like the Haleo and stuff. That group, I don't think liked Sambo
Footlocks.
guys at all,
Oh,
or
interesting.
liked lucha libre guys,
And-
and those are the guys who would footlock.
And Chris has mentioned before that there were Brazilians who were more pure to the origins of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And then there were more open-minded ones who wanted to learn wrestling and sambo and competed.
Yep.
Didn't Hegan compete
Yes.
in sambo?
Hegan
Hegan
did,
competed in sambo. They were training with Bob Anderson. Like there were different schools of thought,
Yeah.
right? This is what what essentially it is there's people like the people who wanted to preserve and then people who wanted to integrate. And ultimately, like we believe that it's an integration and that,
Extreme integration.
yeah, it's extreme integration. But Chris, one of the things he used to teach about footlocks was that if we're always just leg hunters, we might tend to stray away from developing guard as much.
Yeah.
Guard and passing guard. And, so that should be the emphasis for the foundational time, white, blue, purple belt. It should be the emphasis on guard and passing guard because that is what is, significant to our art.
Yeah.
And I think that what your initial question about what should people be thinking about and everything is, again, it's individual and it changes over time. But like Chris mentioned, something like not using your grips when you're rolling. When you're learning or at any stage during the progression through the belts, but like as a new white belt, you might have to be thinking a lot about just how to perform the techniques,
Yeah.
right?
Just the steps of the move.
Just the steps of the move. And if I was to say, try to not think about the steps at all, that might be very confusing to somebody who's just walking in. So I think it is nice and important to maybe have more directed roles at that time where like if you have a goal, like I'm going to just try to keep my guard closed and choke the person. You know what I mean? Because that's something I can remember how to do. Or if I'm on top, I'm just going to try to practice this one pass that I learned.
Yeah. Well, like one of the things that Hickson, he always did, but like in these last like X amount of years, he does what you call situational sparring, where you're going at it 100%, but your only goal is to regain posture. And if you regain posture, you won. Or stand up in the guard, or open the guard, or start with an underpass, ready, go. And just to hone the steps of a move, because when you free roll, we default to what we're comfortable doing. And when you want to learn something that you want to emphasize, you need to situationally spar, not just learn a move. Okay, guys, free roll. Instead, isolate one aspect that you're gonna isolate. Like one guy starts with hooks on and an RNC. Ready, go. Can you escape?
And it's, can you apply, so a lot of times the way that we like to think of it is more like, can you apply the principles of how to make this work, rather than thinking about, first I do this, then I do this, then I do this.
Yes.
If you can learn, even as a white belt, I think that it's the most beneficial. If you're thinking about the principles of how, if someone has an RNC, the first thing I got to do is make sure they're not occluding my carotid arteries, right? And where do I move from there, using principles and hips and things like that, as opposed to memorizing 1, 2, 3, 4. That's not, I think it's more beneficial to be thinking about principles in the long run.
It sounds like what I'm hearing here is that the most helpful advice you could give somebody is, before you step on the mat for your training, to maybe take a step back and go like internally, like, what am I doing here?
Yes.
What's
Big
my
picture.
Setting an intention.
Yeah, setting an intention for what you're going to do when you're rolling, and maybe that includes a little scan of the room too.
Yes.
See who's there. See what's going on. What am I going to do with this group? How's this going to?
How hostile?
Okay,
or
yes.
How is this going to fit into
is
my?
it a friendly or hostile
And
environment?
Fit
each
into my goals,
person, it's nice to have a room that I'm familiar with and I know everybody, because I know each person I roll with slightly differently.
Yeah.
If I'm used to having a certain person, I know that if they get a hold of me, they're going to be jerking me around, and I've got spinal stenosis and neck arthritis, and that's not going to be good.
Yeah.
I'm going to be playing in a much more cautious way to make sure that I don't get into that position where I'm going to aggravate my injuries.
Yeah.
Right? Versus somebody that maybe I fully trust and they're totally aware of all my injuries and I know they're not going to do that to me. I might roll a little bit more competitively.
Yeah.
Right? So it's really just, it's a
Yeah,
person by person situation.
I remember being an excited, a purple belt, rolling with John Machado. And at one point, he was kind of mad. He like stopped me. He was like, "Chris, come on, slow down. You're pinching me, you're squeezing me, you're doing all this, and I still beat you anyway." But then I'm going to feel little injuries on me. And then it clicked. Like I was kind of humiliated. Like, I thought I was like performing so well,
Doing good,
jumping around. It's like from then on, I like kind of always strive to be a smoother grappler.
Nice.
And the other thing, the other thing about being smooth is more people are going to want to roll with you.
Yep.
Because
You'll
you're
get
being
better.
smooth, and you're more intentional about every movement that you're doing. You're not just spazzing around, so you're using up less energy, which means you get less exhausted, which means
more
you can
efficient.
train for
Yep.
longer, and it
It's
is more
efficient.
efficient. And if you're just kind of like jerking
Just
around
like
every
trying to
which
grab
way,
and which way, and like
kind of pointless.
That's like I say, the athletic 4-stripe white belt is sometimes the biggest pain in the ass.
Oh, for
it's
sure.
like putting a feral cat in a pillowcase.
Yeah.
You'll do it, but there's nothing fun about it.
Yeah.
It's not a pleasurable roll in any way.
Yeah.
And then you like roll with some really smooth, a black belt, even if they're dominating you, catching your back. It's done in such a smooth way. It's pleasurable.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, that was a nice little hip
Yeah.
switch. You
Yeah.
juked me there or whatever it
And
was.
it doesn't
right?
hurt.
It doesn't hurt.
I don't think that this should hurt.
It shouldn't hurt. You
I
should
hate it when it
feel
does hurt.
uninjured when you walk off the mat.
Yeah, and I just, for your progress too, I mean, I had a number of years where I entered every single roll with the goal of tapping the person that I
As
was
fast
rolling
as you
against,
could.
as fast as I possibly
those are the
could.
competitive years.
And like and I'm talking like every roll. So it was
Yeah.
like, and I wasn't like, don't get me wrong, I wasn't going into a kids class and doing
Right.
that. It
Oh,
was,
I would.
I was with I was with a group of like savage dudes that were on the same page, and so it was
Yeah.
like that
Your
was
group
every
of
single
guys,
roll.
it's a competitive group.
When I was competing, it was like, don't talk to me unless you want to roll hard.
Yeah, Pretty much.
Don't even look at me, because I'm competing next weekend or next month or in 2 months, and every single roll I'm going to go as hard as I can and try to submit the other person.
Because you don't want to water down your game.
I don't want to fight how I train, and I don't want to fight out there like I'm, teaching kids class.
But I felt like I got, from doing that, I actually got to a spot where I kind of like my progress or my learning kind of like stopped.
It plateaus.
It plateaued like really, really hard. And then I had to like relax a little bit and then like try to enter these like more art type of roles in order to like move on up in my learning, in my progress.
And that's like why I often say the general courses, you get to your purple belt on your strengths, which might even be your attributes. Mm-hmm. You get through it to your brown by addressing your weaknesses.
I could totally relate to that.
And I would say like that competitive phase for me, it was like, blue, purple, beginning of brown belt when I was really like that. And then like somehow I got humbled through multiple injuries, because training like that is also a lot more risky.
It is way more risky.
And, and getting humbled and then figuring out a way to have more balance, more like calmness in my mind, and be able to still perform well in competition.
But it almost feels like it's part of the process too. So it's almost like,
totally.
Don't not do that if you are at that spot and that's where you are in your trajectory. But
maybe it doesn't. So like for me, I feel like there was a lot of anxiety associated with it, a lot of mental conflict, a lot of, if I didn't perform well, beating myself up in my head, going over every single thing, worrying about who was going to be on the mat, constantly competing with everybody. Everybody was it wasn't like the team sense. It was more like this competitive sense, right? Yeah. And so I don't necessarily think that that's healthy or necessary. So for me, it might have been a little extreme. Yeah. So I'm just, suggesting that maybe there's a gentler, softer way to go through that phase and still have it without getting quite so nuts.
Yeah.
And I always imagine, like one of the things that I've always imagined since I was a small kid, I imagine an alien spaceship like lands in my backyard sometimes, or my roof, and it's like this big and they're the size of a 2-inch action figures, these cool aliens that have some way they could completely heal me. So I could literally go break my arm, snap my neck, and they'll wave this wand, whoosh, restores and heals me. If that were true and possible, would I train super competitive every single time? And I think the answer is yes, I would. I would go ahead and not worry about the emotional feeling of pain, because really it's not pain that worries me, it's debilitation. I don't want to be debilitated. So then, like, when I think through this experiment of the mind, it brings me to a long-term goal. Okay, so my goal is in 5 years, I want to still be able to run upstairs. And if I'm constantly letting my knee get ridden really far, that might not happen. Now, if the spaceship came and could heal me, I would adjust my training because I could heal.
That spaceship is called PED.
Yeah, I know.
What's PED?
Performance enhancing drugs.
Oh, shoot. I need me some of those.
But even then, that won't totally do it, because then you got to think the long range problems.
Yeah, when you're like
heads.
80, does PED still help you, or do you just have a whole messed up body?
I was looking at that guy. What is it? Amaury, like the old Carlson Gracie guy, Amaury Beteto or something like that.
I kind of know you're talking Barreto.
Yeah. Classic old school Carlson Gracie guy. And I saw recent pictures of him. He's like more jacked now than he was back then. Yeah. And I'm like, damn.
I mean, you can play that roid game all the way to death.
Yeah.
And like there are numerous aging action stars who are clearly on PEDs.
Yeah.
And they've even, if you go look on the internet and say, type in their name, arrested for, and they'll say, oh, that guy was arrested leaving Brazil with steroids.
Yeah.
This big time actor. I mean, I maybe, and I've asked, like, God, if I could afford $5,000 a month for the best roid quacks, would I do it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's like one of those things. And I think for me, a kind of an inverse vanity, I wouldn't, because I know that everyone would know I was on steroids.
Yeah.
I don't want everyone to be like, oh yeah, obviously TRT, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, maybe like most people couldn't tell, but the people that I care about knowing would
They would
know,
know. Yeah.
that I'm on
Yeah.
roids.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem...
In roid rage? What about that?
Yeah, I don't want roid rage. And it seems like you're cheating,
Yeah.
right?
It does in a way. Okay, so there's one more part of this conversation that I wanted to ask about or have.
Sure.
But I wanted to transition there by sharing that. So a mindset that I've kind of adopted over the last few years is I kind of try to enter every role letting the other person do their thing a little bit. And I try to like adapt. My thought is like my ethics and the way I approach the world is like I want to try to go about my interactions with other people to bring the best out of them. So I try to show up in a way that's true to myself, but that allows the other person to be their best selves. So I feel like I'll enter roles a lot, trying to monitor what the other person's doing and see what their game is like, and then try to bring out the best of their game into the role. So I'm really kind of like in their zone, but my ego definitely takes a lot of damage for doing that because I get into all these bad situations and I get subbed in spots where maybe like if I was in competitive mode, I wouldn't necessarily get subbed. And I have a lot of times where like I'll be rolling with people and I can tell that at the end of the roll, they're like, oh, yeah, like,
yes.
Yeah, and
they're all proud, but you know that you didn't really...
But does that matter? I keep going like, I don't think it matters. Like, I think it's great. They're feeling good, right?
One of the things...
There's nothing wrong with that.
One thing that I think is always kind of...
Is there anything wrong with it?
But fun.
No, people can feel good.
I mean, most black belts can reflect on a time when they were blue belts and they were rolling with a brown or a black belt over a series of weeks and months, and thought they were doing really good, and then all of a sudden that black belt put on their A game, and then they realized, fuck, they were doing that they were C gaming me for 3 months.
Yeah,
I think that it's I think it's kind of important to have a blend, like you were talking about. You probably maybe you do that. That's a good way to approach a lot of rolling, especially if you're rolling with lower belts. Like Chris says, when he's rolling with colored belts, he really tries to not use any strength.
Any attributes,
and then he saves some of his attributes for his black belt rolls. And having those people where you can just go sport competitive and have that balance between those different things, you know, I think it's important.
Craig Jones was saying that when he goes and does seminar routes, he likes to try to roll with people, right? And then obviously the people at the seminars just like wanna.
Yeah, sure.
So he says if he gets tapped out by like a blue belt or something while he's like on seminar, he makes sure to roll with them again, and then he lets them tap him again, and then a third time. He's like, because
then it removes their glory.
Yeah. I was like, you're crazy, man.
Yeah, that's.
But like, I just think it really doesn't matter at the end of the day, to be honest. Like, your ego doesn't have to have you winning every single round.
Yeah.
Your ego needs to be stroked from the inside, right? So you need to know where you're at. You need to know that, you know, when I go to Chime and I go, hey man, let's roll for real. That's a monitor of my performance training, right? And then my other training is another monitor of my training on a different metric, right? So, I guess
my
the
cue
question
for Chime is let's get lit, which means low intensity interval training, because I want him to roll as gently as he possibly can. Otherwise, I leave hurt.
Right.
Yeah. And I don't want to be hurt.
Right. Yeah. And that's fine too. I feel like, I think this is an issue that for some reason is weird to talk about, but like, getting tapped by other people and how you should like process that in the way that you think about your rolling, you know. And then I hear a lot of like Gary Tonin, who's like an amazing jiu-jitsu athlete, saying like, I get tapped like, he's saying I get tapped like 30 times per session, and like I'm constantly putting myself in bad spots to see if I can figure out an escape, and then I get tapped. And like, it's not.
I think that's a smarter way to approach.
I think that's okay, but my problem is that if I let myself go into those spots, then people are crushing my cervical spine,
Like
whether they're doing
injured.
triangles, arm locks, chokes, whatever it is. So I kind of have to train not to get into bad position, and that's how my training has always been.
Yeah.
Like Chris said, he would, like I said, Chris wouldn't let us learn how to escape. He didn't want us to be in bad positions, so I focus more on posture and form and not getting drawn in and being able to hold my base, and those are, you know, so I mean, if somebody likes practicing that because it's their thing, that's fine. It's not my thing at all.
Yeah.
I don't want to be smashed. I don't want to end up on the bottom of Chime's Keisakatami, though he still puts me there, you know, but it hurts, and I have to tell him like, don't do it so hard because this is going to cause me to have a sore neck for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
So it really just depends on your body. And, you know, and I think the most important thing for anybody who's practicing jiu-jitsu is to honor your body, because you only have one. It's not going to last forever. Lots of injuries are possible. And I was really stupid for probably the first 10 years of my training or more. And I'm paying the price now through constant physical pain.
Yeah.
So it sucks.
Well, that was one of the things that when I first started coming around you guys, I was really impressed by both of you, is that, you know, I would watch you train, and it seemed like if you got tapped in a situation, like it didn't seem like it was a factor. Like it was just kind of like, oh, cool, and then move on, right? And it wasn't like, oh, the lower belt tapped the upper belt, or like there was no like thing to it. And I feel like other places that I've been, it was such a thing, and then I've felt it as such a thing through my progress.
And it's very natural that hierarchical thinking then affects the entire culture.
Totally.
Of the mat.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. But what are your thoughts? I mean, does it matter if you're getting tapped or what? How do you do? How do you process getting tapped by people?
You know what? Like I said before, this used to bother me a lot when I was a younger person, and now I'm just glad that I get to still train. Yeah. That's it. I'm glad with the amount of injuries and pain that I have, that I can still show up, whether it's 1 hour a week or 3 hours a week or whatever it is. I am grateful. That is where my mindset is having gratitude that I still get to participate.
Yeah.
And whatever happens, that's what happens. And I think this is just a development of my own personal like ego and process. Because when I was younger, I would ruminate on it. I'd be like, how'd they catch me? Yeah. And I know some people, like, let's say I toe holded somebody, and then they're still holding on to it the next week. That toe hold you did last week was so good. You know, they're still thinking about it. I forgot about that a long time ago. I'm here to release, you know, some of the pressures of my life, to, you know, practice this art that I've dedicated so much of my life to, given up body parts to, you know, that I'm just grateful that I get to still participate.
Yeah. I just think, it's definitely seems to me like a bad move to think about you getting tapped as like some big thing that says something about your whole life. Right? It's just
like you're playing chess and you got checkmated. And in the next round, maybe I checkmated the other person.
It's a part of learning, right? And it's a learning tool to kind of analyze what you're doing, what's working and what's not working. It's not, Matt is better than me because he got me this one time or whatever. I don't think that's really what it is. Would you agree? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm doing all the talking here. It's about you guys.
Used to kind of say, sort of as a joke, that like, there's 365 days in a year, so you might train out of those 300 days if you're really involved in this, and 10 rolls a day, so that's 3,000 rolls a year. And then you add up the time, like I got 10 years of youthful rolls left, so I have about 30,000 rolls in me, or like whatever it is. And then when you start realizing, oh, actually, I only get like 5 good rolls a week. And you start hammering it down. Like I remember thinking, wow, I've got about 2,700 rolls left of like competitive hard rolls
In your life.
in my life. And I'm not going to waste that on a blue belt, that hard competitive roll. I'm going to save that for other times. I'm not going to just... So, but in some ways that puts you in a scarcity mindset, which also is unhealthy.
Yeah.
So then that brings you back to, oh, this is absurd. I just have to be here now.
And be grateful that you're here now.
Be grateful that I'm here
Because
now.
who knows? Maybe you something bad happens to you tomorrow and you don't roll ever
Yep.
again. But hey,
Or
about
AI comes and
Yeah.
restores me to youth.
my strong, firm belief is that if you learn the principles of jiu-jitsu, such as posture, how to glue your triceps to your rib cage, how to protect your neck, you will be tapping a lot less. I don't know that, I think that I tap a lot less than your average person because I have ingrained in me, probably more so than a lot of my male counterparts, I feel like, because I feel like you guys kind of, your bodies work differently and maybe your arm's fully extended and you can just turn out of it.
Yeah.
The second my arm goes here, I'm tapping because I'm going to be hurt
gonna
if
do
it
it,
goes
yeah.
any farther. So I try to never let my arms, like I really work on that elbow drift. I really work on this hunching little ball
Yeah.
and, or posture, whatever it is. I really like, that is probably something that I do better than anything else in my game is try to not get submitted.
Yeah.
So you don't have to get submitted that much, I think. I mean, unless you want to, but I don't want to, because then what fun is that really if my joints are getting yanked on?
Yeah.
It's not, it hurts me. Is what I'm saying. It physically hurts me.
Yeah. And it's important to persevere and carry on, right? And not let these things bum you out and keep you from wanting to go back for more, because the whole thing's kind of about endurance, perseverance, longevity, adaptability, being able to bounce back. So I think it's a necessary part of the deal that you go through that. Sick. You guys want to hit some cues?
Past, present, future.
Yeah.
A triangle.
There you go.
Keep a balance of.
Yeah.
Okay.
You guys want to move on to some cues?
Sure.
Sure.
Do you have anything more to say about the optimum rolling mindset? You ready? All right. This guy, Frank, says,
What's up, Frank?
Chris, what is this Hegelian Taoism you keep talking about?
Oh, boy.
He doesn't really know.
Well, I'm going to definitely say that I am an amateur philosophy enthusiast, just like I'm an amateur historian enthusiast. Kind of like with Dan Carlin, who does hardcore history podcasts. He doesn't claim he's an historian. He's a history buff, a history junkie. Because to be a real historian, you got to go to primary source and all that stuff.
You know what? Can I tell you something about Dan Carlin? I like listen to his podcast and it sounds awesome, but like I do listen to that and go like, has this guy even like been to university? Like I haven't spent time looking up his stuff because it's not like some sort of like claiming. I should be open to listen to what he has to hear.
Yeah.
But for some reason, my brain, it closes off a little bit because he's not presenting
he's not
as like
academic PhD historian.
I'm at Stanford doing.
No,
I'm like, I don't want to hear it from you.
He's a history enthusiast, which
you,
like me, and then you get a different perspective than when you're in the ivory tower nerding out primary source, because what you're picking up a bunch of different people's opinion and colloquial view of history. And so when it comes to philosophy, like I understand most philosophical concepts, but the terminology, like I never took tests on understanding what the terminology of, what does teleology mean? What does etymology mean? What is this? Like I'm bad at that part, but I grasp the concepts. And Hegel is kind of like, to me, like the Western version of the Taoist. Whereas like, you have Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, Zen, like all these things in the East. And then in the West, you have your classical stuff and then the introduction of monotheism, which then ultimately led to the Dark Ages and then the Renaissance, which is the rebirth of classical, which is like thinking back to what Aristotle, Socrates, and Plato thought about. And so I'm approaching with a very philosophical 101 view, but at the same time, like, and somebody will correct me who's a philosophy person who's read all of Hegel, because
Drew can tell us.
Hegel is a really hard read, just because some people will say he's not a great writer.
So Hegelian Taoism has to do with some guy named Hegel. Hegel
was a philosopher.
Is a philosopher, and he made something up.
And I want to say the middle 1800s, and what the dialectic, which is
the Hegelian dialectic, right?
Just the dialectic is a form of arguing that comes from the Socratic method.
But people don't know what any of these words mean, Chris. What is dialectic? What is Socratic?
See, that's why I interpreted. I'm not the person to go to who can define all of these terms.
But you talk about Hegelian Taoism a bunch.
The concept.
So what does it mean to you?
That's what I'm getting to.
Sorry.
The concept is dialectic is a binary.
Meaning two
and
things.
Hegel was breaking the things that are illogical about the binary. That's like part of what he did, which leads to postmodernism. So modernism is there's an objective truth to everything. And if we use our brains and science and all this stuff, we can find out what is the objective truth. Whereas the postmodern thought is there is no objective truth. Everything is subjective. And just by simplifying that, we're missing the essence of both modernism and postmodernism. So in a way, Hegel is the synthesis of this dialectic. But being that I'm not a philosophy guy per se, I can't really explain it that well. But if that person is interested, I could recommend you some really good people who are philosophy people who can really get into what Hegelianism is.
But, okay, so like I don't really feel like I have any kind of grasp about what Hegelian Taoism is after that talk. But I feel like I could probably Google it and figure it out, and then I could probably explain it to someone.
Probably. So
Taoism has to do with the yin and the yang, right?
Which came actually 500 years after the Tao was written, but it is a great from China, and so there's a thesis, an antithesis, antithesis, and a synthesis. That's like the triangle of Hegel, of how two opposites can be resolved. But gosh, I wish I would have boned up a bit before.
Frank's putting you on the spot.
He asked that, yeah, because like now it makes me want to go jump in and bone up on it, so like I can explain it in a way that last week I probably could have, because I was fresh off of viewing something from a Hegelian perspective. Yeah. And one of the reasons why a lot of people hate Hegel is because they credit Hegel for introducing postmodernism. And some people think that it's also...
How dare he?
It's also what influenced Karl Marx. Dun, 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 right? Marxism, communism, you're evil. You're into Hegel, you're a fucking communist. But it also inspired like John Locke and like other people that came up with the foundations of modern capitalism and supply and demand and all that stuff. So I'm not going to answer because I cannot properly.
Should we answer it another time?
But basically,
no, I think that's a good answer.
Fine. It's a good answer. Okay.
Yeah,
I think that's good.
The answer is there is no answer.
From my perspective, Hegel brilliantly floats the line between modernism and postmodernism, which people now are calling metamodern.
Mm-hmm. I'm still confused, but that's
no.
okay.
I think that's a great answer. You're explaining what that is. That's perfect.
Yeah. So like,
clearly, a complicated topic like that, you can't just answer real quick like that. But it's good to get a little background and what your thinking is of it and what you're talking about when you're talking about it. And then if you want to know more, you got to read a little deeper into it.
Well, that's like that classic like Alan Watts, I think when he's explaining the Taoism, he does this great job where if you picture some piece of soft velvet and then you start zooming in to the molecular level, it's these spikes, these jagged, rough spikes. And then you zoom in more and it becomes fluid again.
Yeah.
So it is both spiky and soft at the same time, depending on your perspective.
Yeah.
So that challenges objective truth. Yeah. That is either spiky or it's soft. It's like, no, it's both. But it's both, not on every perspective either.
And sometimes it's neither.
And sometimes
because it's not
neither.
binary. And I think that's why you refer to it often, is because you talk about the trap of the binary, and why you like to think of things in threes as opposed to twos.
Yes.
So I think that's what you're referring to when you talk about that.
The Hegelian.
In one sentence.
The Taoist. Kind of like, I think this world, particularly in the West, people who say they lean left should try to, what's called steelman, give the best argument for the right and conservatism that they possibly can. Uh-huh. And the people who claim to be on the right and conservative should try to give the best argument for progressivism that they possibly can. And then, because really, conservatism, the opposite is progressivism. It's not liberalism. But because liberals have been associated with progressives, sometimes even liberals think they're all progressive. But really, liberalism, the opposite of, is illiberalism. So Stalin was a left-wing economic leftist who was illiberal. Hitler was a right-wing illiberal guy. Uh-huh. So, but what do they have in common? They're both illiberal. So that gives a person who's brainwashed into pure right thinking, they could say, see, Hitler was, it even says National Socialist. He was left-wing. It's like, no, he wasn't. He was right-wing. Yeah. But he was illiberal. And Stalin, people say, see what happens when you go progressivism? You end up with Stalinism. No, that's because you approached it in a very illiberal way. And then, I mean, we could analyze this forever, but I really think that the synthesis is to look at these two opposites and see where they are both right. And when you see where classical, formal, the jiu-jitsu is good, and experimental new modern game is good, let's synthesize it so we can grow and move. Then that would lead you into the philosophy of ethics, where we're asking, why are we doing this? Who is it good for, right? So then you got to jump into ethics. And none of this you'll understand if you don't also look at science and history. Because then without history, you have no perspective. And without the scientific method, which is the best method we've come up with to find truth, we're going to come up with woo-woo bullshit. And then we introduce the philosophy of religion and where that enters.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely seems like most things are dielectric, right? Or
dialectical. But, or is that just because our brains can't help it?
Well, right. And then the third option is it requires an abstraction, right? So it's there's an abstract component to that third option where it actually isn't a thing until your brain can wrap around.
And I believe Hegel, as opposed to René Descartes, that came up with the infamous foundation of all reason, which is...
he was big in mathematics.
Very big in mathematics.
Loves mathematics.
Which is, I think, therefore I am. The only thing that I can really know is that something in there knows. Something in there can think.
Right.
I don't know if he actually exists, but I know something inside my head has a perception of him.
That's an abstraction of what's
actually
happening.
Yes.
Yeah, the third option is an abstraction.
And then I believe it was Hegel, but it was others who would say, but even that you only really know because of your relationship to others. Now that's more Eastern.
Yeah.
It's is like in the West, we see ourselves as these individuals all competing with each other, whereas the East sees it much more as like, not all East, like but Confucianism is actually more conservative in its Western way of thought, but that we're an organism.
Yeah.
And
like
that
Buddhism and Taoism.
you cannot be an individual. You are part of an organism. And this planet
Part of a
is
whole.
part of a larger organism and part of a larger, and that whole, which is like a really cool way of thought. But then, like, scientifically, I think we all must humble ourselves to realize that my tiny little evolved primate brain, to think that I really know anything is absurd.
You know something.
Well, that's relative.
Yeah.
Relative, I know things, but to think I can answer factual yes or no, this does exist or not, in some ways is absurd. But at the
totally
same
absurd.
time, can I objectively say if I walk in front of the bus, that bus will fucking kill me? So then that grounds you back to what we're going to call reality, right? And then we can get into what is fucking reality.
Maybe if you walk into that bus, it'll be the first time you ever lived.
There you go, right?
No.
So go rewatch Fight Club,
Yeah.
Matrix, which are all postmodern views, metaphorically, of the world. And the irony is, to be red-pilled now is to go conservative, where really what that is to go postmodern, which is why we're in this weird postmodern conservatism it's happening now, which is a post-truth version where the conservatives are supposed to be protecting objective knowledge and reality. And the progressives are supposed to be questioning it and experimenting. Now you have these right-wingers experimenting and questioning the institutional... it's weird.
It is weird.
We're in very warped, weird, upside-down world times. Even our art expressed like all through it, whether you watch Stranger Things or whatever. It's all
the upside down?
metaphorically based on philosophy.
Yeah.
And the Demogorgon?
Yes.
Yeah.
The ultimate evil.
Okay.
Well, I think we gotta.
The summation of the worst of
gotta move
left
on.
and right, the worst of everything.
We gotta hit some of this on another pod sometime when we get a metamorphosis into our phase future of the podcast. Maybe we'll be talking about that stuff more than jiu-jitsu stuff. All right, we got another cue though.
Yes.
This is from @RichardU1983.
Ooh.
This guy has been an awesome commenter on YouTube.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he
thanks, Richard.
hits a bunch of like really great productive comments on YouTube, so we really appreciate this guy. So he says, I'm genuinely interested in more old Machado stories and how Hegan integrated wrestling into BJJ. I see now in modern BJJ more power halves and leg rides that weren't there before. And if you can share your experiences about when you saw these transitions, it would be super cool.
Yeah, and that's like, to give a big picture of it, evolution is happening whether you believe in it or not. It's just, it's a thing. There's cultural evolution, there's language evolution, there's grappling evolution, there's biological evolution. There's like, all this is happening. And Hegan was an early adopter of what I'm going to call true mixed martial arts and grappling. Let's mix. Let's find what are those good parts. And a lot of it comes from Bob Anderson, who taught the young Hegan, young Hickson, young, I think Henzo was there. There's a picture of them as kids who tend to be more open-minded than the grown-up adults, Greco. And Holes of Gracie, Bob Anderson took to the U.S. and won some Greco competitions. And Holes was going to be like in the hierarchical patriarch, the guy. Then Holes had a hang accent and died. And Hickson, like reluctantly, classic heroes a journey like Luke Skywalker. I'm not ready. You know, Holes was the man. It is now up to you, young Luke, or whatever. Right? I mean, it's a great story, and but so when Hegan came to the U.S., even though his mentors, the black belts who like raised him coming up from blue, purple, brown, and black, rejected other martial arts. We fight those arts. When Hegan was always curious. So when he got over here, he's now alone. He's a black belt. Hey, Chris, can we go to El Camino College wrestling room? I want to practice my wrestling and learn wrestling. And he did all these things where he loved all the grappling arts. Sambo, Greco, wrestling. So during, I would say, Hegan's less competitive years, but young adult years from like 22 to 30 was when Hegan got really into integrating all the grappling styles. And of course, because he's a leader in that, that knowledge funnels down to us, the students, the rival schools that get beaten by the combination of them, then they pick them up. And that's like that phase, which was also when the internet was new. And the internet was the most free period of time. Web 1.0, right? Before it became walled off into apps and commercial control and all that stuff. And I'm not advocating for internet socialism, but in a way, I'm saying the internet was better before it was walled off with paywalls. And it was a place where you really could, the web was the Wild West. And Web 3.0 is completely shut down. You put in a search on a thing, you're on page 34, and it's still fucking advertisements and corporate websites. And remember that period of time, and like I distinctly as an artist, remember on an image, like I could put in, image of blah, blah, blah. And they were all different in this thing. Now it's fucking all locked into Pinterest or some other fucking... It's like you can't even do a good image search anymore.
Remember how great the OG Craigslist was?
Yes.
The OG Craigslist was like the best website ever. It was such a good community and such a good deal. And then it's just like,
now it's
go on there anymore.
It's fucking dead. And Facebook, like just like everything, there's a good and a bad. There's some really good parts about it, and then there's some parts where it absolutely just fucking killed communication.
Yeah.
And Twitter or whatever it is, like I distinctly remember, I think it was 2011, the Arab Spring was happening. Facebook, but Twitter was allowing these countries that have lived under repressive regimes for decades, a century, and able to organize to where the people could rise up. And people like the naive view was, oh, look how wonderful. The world is going to democratize. And I remember thinking the whole time, no, just wait until the power gets a hold of this powerful tool.
Yeah.
It's going to do what the radio did in the 20s, which was liberate. In the 30s, it became fascism. It became a way of controlling.
I got lost a little bit on how this relates to Hegan.
Oh, yeah.
Wrestling.
So
there was internet and Hegan.
Hegan was integrating all the grappling styles. And I often say, like, wrestling had balance and movement, back-arching movement, but you never felt pressure. Mm-hmm. But the Greco guys, you would feel pressure in the clinch part. Mm-hmm. Jiu-jitsu guys were fluid and flowy and sneaky. Judo guys had like this, what I would call static clean. Mm-hmm. There's this like rigidity, like
isometric strength, yeah.
Right? And pressure came from the integration that the sum was greater than the parts. Ah. And pressure arose from taking the best elements out of each of those arts, and suddenly the pressure game evolved. And maybe I'm wrong. I'm sure someone will correct me because there's always somebody who has a different opinion, which is fine. I love that. But I think the pressure game evolved in the 90s.
Interesting.
particularly the late 90s. Also, as like the Hegans and the Hicksons were starting to age and not be as fast as they were anymore, which then you start going back more for control, and you integrate these Greco structure things, but you do a Greco on the ground with that judo hold, that wrestling balance, you get the pressure game.
That's interesting, because I feel like if I were to say what feels like good jiu-jitsu to me, it's the feeling of pressure and control from both top and bottom.
Yes.
So when you have someone that's really good on the bottom, you feel pressure from the bottom.
Yes.
Like you're stuck, you can't move, like it's a feeling of pressure. I don't know how else to say it. It sounds weird because it's the person on the bottom and you can only feel it. It's kind of hard to see, but like the good jiu-jitsu, you feel the pressure from the bottom and you feel the control from the bottom, and then same thing on top. Same thing in every position. Yes. I think someone that's really, really good, you're going to feel pressure and control.
That's and when we analyze that comes from frame, flow, and weight distribution. Those are the three things. But even that loses the essence. Like one of the things that Hickson has been talking with me about over the last years is finding the essence, which is kind of finding the integration, the thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So that's why I say I'm a Hegelian Taoist in my grappling too.
Nice.
Not that that is truth, because truth is relative. And then people accuse me of being a postmodernist, and I'm fucking not, because I approach postmodernism objectively.
It's just your raft in the sea of chaos that you choose to cling to, right?
And if you know what any of those words mean, you can probably understand what he's talking about.
So one last quick cue that I've been hanging on to for a while that I feel like we should just hit because it's been there. So at capital B, capital G dash SJ7ZH says, did you ever train with Phil or Rick Migliarese?
I've met them a couple times, but I never trained with them. I have trained with some of their students. I hope I'm not wrong. I hope like I'm not. There's like there's some memory holes that maybe, but I don't think I ever trained with the Migliarese brothers.
I see. Okay.
But
we have brain holes.
I always think
they were coming up and were innovative and doing cool things at that same 90s period.
Nice. Yeah, I always think for you guys, like, there's just so many roles and so many people and so much stuff.
Yeah.
And there's all these different phases. It's probably really hard to inventory all that.
If our brains were like tip-top shape, maybe we could remember more.
If our brains were more...
But we have brain damage.
Well, I think that's good for today. We got to let everybody know. So,
if they want me to talk about it?
These questions are awesome and we need more of them. So
yeah, we love the questions.
Yeah. And we're even thinking about doing a hotline where you could call in potentially.
Live.
Where you could live would be great, but I think we should start with a message system.
Oh, that's
so I'm going to set up a message system where people could call in. We'll get the number out there when it's time. But you could call in and you could leave a jiu-jitsu rant, or you could leave a jiu-jitsu question. And then we can
rants are good.
And we can have the recording. We'll play the recording in studio. And then that'll like integrate people even more into our show. But for now, if you can send your questions to podcast@combatbase.com, we can get them answered, but we'll let you know when the hotline comes through. And then we got the special deal going.
Right. If you want to join the Combat Base Club at combatbase.com, I think we have it set up for the first month free. First month free at Combat Base Club using the podcast as the coupon code.
And you get, if you're a Combat Base Club member, you get access to all the online stuff. There's a bunch of amazing instructional stuff.
Instructionals.
Amazing instructionals by you guys. Some old school stuff, some new school stuff. A lot of combat-based black belt instructionals. There's deals on gear.
There's a 10% discount for all merchandise.
And the Chris Haueter art stuff. So if you want some of the cool art, you can buy that online. There's also some training components
Yes, we do a monthly Q&A, question and answer session, and we have some HIIT classes and yoga classes that we do on Zoom, so you can participate in those. And I also email copies of all the classes out to all of our combat-based club members.
And then you get a super deal on private classes from you guys too.
If you join at
you're a
the
member?
premium level, so that one, so if you're a premium members are get special invites to private training as well as deals on private lessons.
I could show you guys secrets that I've learned over the years from the Machado brothers, from Hickson, from integrating them into thinking street, training sport, and practicing art.
And then you also don't have to just be a combat-based person. You could still sign up to go compete under your existing school while you're a member of combat-based.
Yeah, combat-based is open to everybody.
But you also could register with IBJJF under combat-based.
Yes, if you want to be our student, if you decide you want to train under us and be promoted with us, we can also sign your IBJJF paperwork.
Yeah, so it's an amazing deal. Pound, like, and subscribe.